everyone. Welcome to This is Whole Life, the podcast live from downtown Orlando at Whole Life Church. But it's not live to you, it's on delay, and we edit a little bit once in a while, but not very often. To my right is lead pastor Ken Wetmore, and across this new heavy-duty table that is now here, Melanie will have to get a picture and put it in since she's usually our photographer. Into the Discord. If you don't follow the show on Discord, you can always check the show notes, swipe up, and you will find a link to the Discord channel that you can join and get little extra tidbits like what's happening today. And this is, her arms are not long enough.
I was going to say, we picked the person with the shortest arms to be doing the...
Maybe Ken should become the new official photographer.
We'll get a selfie stick next time.
I think we have one, don't we?
We have?
I think we do, the new kit. So, if you have never joined us before, we discuss the things happening here at Whole Life Church in Orlando. And this week, the discussion comes or circles around Ruth. And there were lots of nuggets. I've read Ruth before, and it's not a long book. So, like your invitation to read Ruth, I was like, yeah. Go read Ruth. It's only 4 chapters long. I don't even feel like Ruth is difficult reading. Like, it's one of those books that are like, it's kind of like Job. I think Job's an easy read, even though the subject matter may not be as easy. But it's one of those that reads more like a story than reads like thou hast and these and the others. And
there are very few begats.
Yeah, so. Right. And the missing begats makes it usually a pleasure, but also...
But see, that's where you're wrong. There were begats at the end of it.
There, at the end of Ruth, was there?
I said there were very few. I didn't say there were none.
There were none.
It is a shorter list.
Yes.
It is a shorter list. Well, and the funny part was, it seems like we talked about names a lot, and if you'd asked me, you just said it, and I still didn't get it, that, man, I sound like a disciple. Anyway, an apprentice.
There we go.
No, disciple, apprentice. But obviously very, very new, very green. I didn't realize there was that many references to names and lineage as what you brought up in, you only had 20-some minutes. And it seemed like we talked a lot about names.
I think I took 30 anyway.
Did it go a little long?
It went a little long.
Yeah.
But we've talked about it. I've forgiven Ken. We're moving on.
Oh,
it's one of those things that we probably need to have a longer conversation about. When you keep doing the same sin over and over and asking for forgiveness and asking for grace and just keep doing it with no apparent desire to really change.
Well, I think it's 70 times 7. So,
Wow.
Are we at 490 yet? I think so. Yeah, I've been here for 4 years now. No. I've got another 200.
Yeah, we good.
Oh, yeah. I've got 8 years total.
And then after that,
I'm out.
She just won't care anymore. It's like, fine, he's not going to stop. Just do what you do. But I hadn't thought of Ruth as that book before. And why didn't I know that Ruth was David's grandmother?
Great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother. I didn't know that.
Nope.
I didn't. That was like a totally new nugget for me. Does it mention it in the book?
Yes, at the very end in that genealogy you did not want to include.
See, that's probably, and I'll be honest.
You skipped the last few verses, didn't you?
I saw a bunch of begats and I just kept on moving.
I kept on. That's now. Truth be told,
I don't judge you.
I do.
I knew he was going to say that. Because I will read the Bible that way sometimes. Where I'm like, man, today is not the day for this. I can't do the whatever and the begats and the whoever's and the thou. I'll just move on because I can't. So that's probably. That's probably why I didn't know that. So there you go. Do not read the Bible like Randy. Read it like Ken, and then
Melanie.
you'll have, or Melanie, and then you'll have more insight into what's actually going on. So we really don't know why they would have named their kids. You said Naomi's name meant pleasantness.
Yeah.
Malon meant sickly. Chilion meant pining.
Yeah.
And of course, Ken meant handsome, which we
had to throw that one in there.
I kind of assumed that anyway.
Oh, thank you, Randy. It's pretty sweet of you.
Well, when you get a good-looking guy, you got to go, well, I wonder what his name means. It's probably not pleasant, but it's probably handsome.
He's keen enough.
Wow, that was pretty good.
You got that? You got that one?
I got it. I followed you. I knew exactly what you did there.
So when did you find out your name was handsome?
My parents are pretty good about letting me know from a pretty early age.
Yeah, and what's your brother's name mean?
We don't talk about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mine means black sheep.
I'm not sure what it means.
Mine means black sheep.
Yeah.
Lucas, what does yours mean?
The one who brings light, I think.
Yeah, light giver. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Melanie?
Wow. Well, Lucas, sitting across the table from you
It does seem brighter in here this morning, doesn't
is
it?
someone whose name means dark. So look at us.
Wow. We.
Does it really?
Yep. It does. Dark.
Wow.
Yeah. Like melanin or melanoma.
Oh.
Wow.
And I just had why does John Candy come to mind all of a sudden? Well, if you're a movie buff, you'll know. Anyway, old melanoma head. Never mind. All right, here we go. So, isn't giving fake names to someone as a biblical author entrusted by God to make sure that, we're supposed to get what we're supposed to, get out of this, doesn't that make you guilty of bearing false witness?
Who said that they were fake names?
Well, you said we didn't know for sure,
No.
right? You insinuated, didn't you? Or did I put more weight into it?
I asked questions. I said, is it possible? I don't know. I mean, they could be their actual names. I mean, maybe they just, the name Chilion just resonated so much that it's like, just sounds pretty, even if it does mean pining.
Well, maybe.
And technically it's true. I mean, because they were sickly and pining. So where's the falsehood in that, Randy?
Yeah.
But you don't. Well, I guess you don't know that going. But you don't know that going into it, or were they just more perceptive of the baby in utero?
I think the author knew going into it.
Yeah. But then that would be the author, not the actual mother.
We don't know.
We don't know.
It seems pretty suspect to me. That's why I'm saying wouldn't.
So, a lot of times, and one of the things that I think that we get really confused is we tend to look at the Bible as like a American biography. And we think the writers are kind of held to the same standards as a historian writing the biography of, a president or a politician or, whatever. And so when you read a biography, it would be very bad practice in our time and culture to make up the names of their brothers or sisters or something. We want to know that they're exactly that way. One of the things that we, again, will get lost on is that biblical authors did not view themselves as biographers. They were writing stories that were there to make a point and teach lessons. And so they wouldn't they weren't as caught up in, is this the actual
Except maybe
name?
Luke.
As they were in, is this helping me move on the point that I'm trying to make with this story?
Gotcha.
And that's why sometimes the Bible will be accused of being inaccurate because one book will have the same genealogy, but names will be different, or there'll be in the Gospels we see one demoniac versus two demoniacs versus and people get really caught up on that, and they really lose sight of that. Oftentimes in the Bible, they're just not as obsessed about the details and facts of it as they are about the point that they're making. Does that mean the story isn't true? No, that's not at all. The story is true, but they can take some license with it at times to make the point that they're trying to make.
I see Melanie shaking her head. She agrees.
I agree.
Oh, good. Well, then
and that doesn't. And I think sometimes it really, if you grew up in a, if you grew up the way I did, where you kind of had this idea that if you hear me say that, it's like, well, wait a minute, but that makes me wonder whether the Bible's true or not, because every word is inspired by God, and yeah, every word is inspired by God. And different times and different cultures have different ways of communicating, and we have to understand that. And what we try to do often is just really shove the Bible into the box of our time and our place, and it doesn't fit very well that way because that's not the mindset. It's not the culture that a lot of these authors came from. And so I think that my encouragement is do some reading, do some research on the way the Bible is written and the backgrounds of it, and view it as what it is. I believe it's inspired by God. I believe it's there to teach us the things that we need to know when it comes to having a relationship with God and how to live a life that's full of meaning and that's pleasing to God. Which, by the way, a life full of meaning and service is what's pleasing to God. I think sometimes we think that God just has like these hoops that he wants us to jump through because it somehow makes him happy to see us like struggle, as opposed to the fact that maybe God has these ideas about what's best for us because it's what's best for us, as opposed to just making him happy to see us struggle and be like, well, this seems really hard. Let's see if they can do this. And that's not at all what the God that I read about in the Bible. So when we go back to the Book of Ruth and we see the names of these two boys, perhaps those really were the names that Naomi and Elimelech named their children. It could be very well that they named them that, and who knows why, but maybe that is what they named them. Or maybe the author of the book, writing, especially if it was written after the exile to Babylon, hundreds of years later, thought, man, I can't remember the name of those boys, but let me go ahead and do a little wink to my readers who are going to kind of know what these names would mean, and kind of wink at what's about to happen and what's going on, and tell you a little bit about who they are.
So the people of the day, the intended audience, are getting the wink at they're going to know what I mean, and we're getting the wink that they'll have Google. I mean, that seems kind of like you guys get to, like, it's written for someone who will understand, the audience that will understand, and maybe a couple thousand years later, you guys are going to have the sum of human knowledge that has come so far that we know that you'll be able to figure it out, or you'll find the meaning.
But the book stands on its own whether you understand these things or not. Like, you can read this book, and if you don't understand what any of the names mean, you're still going to walk away from the underlying message of this book, which is all about faithfulness. Now, I think no matter what time, place, or culture you come from, you'll understand the idea of faithfulness that's being promoted in this book. And what happens, though, is that if you're willing to take the extra time to Google or to research a little bit more, you come away with a richer experience. You get a deeper understanding of things. And so that's just, but doesn't mean that if you don't understand these things, you won't walk away with a blessing, that you won't walk away knowing God better, or having a better idea of the things that are important to God. You'll still understand the basic things. It's just that when you take the time to actually do the additional study and go, okay, so what was going on back then? What are some of what do these words actually mean? What's going on? What's going on with this whole levirate marriage thing? What's going on with some of these other things? You'll come away with a much more robust understanding of the story and what the author is really trying to convey, and also what you might be able to translate into the realities of today when we don't practice levirate marriage, where we don't have the edges of our field that we don't harvest, when we maybe don't put as much thought into what the name of our child means when we're picking a name. It's like, well, that's a really pretty name, but I'm not really thinking that much about what the name means. And in the world that we live in, if you take the time to study this out, you can say, okay, so what applies from that time to now, and what doesn't really apply to now, but I can also take some principles that would go along with that.
I think that's the thing that we forget sometimes when we look at the Bible, is that I don't think the author of the Book of Ruth was thinking, in 2025, in a language that no one speaks yet, they're going to be reading this. I think they wrote it for the people of their time and their place. And the fact that we have it to read as a witness of what people experienced and how they perceived their time and their experience with God, it doesn't mean, I mean, there's a little bit of arrogance that comes from thinking that it was written for us. We benefit from it because we have that record, we have that witness, but trying to go back and impose, like Ken said, impose our culture and our time and our standards for a historical record on an ancient text that was written thousands of years ago, it doesn't really work.
It doesn't. That's clear.
And not only that, but when we talk about inspiration, Randy, oh my goodness. Okay.
Watching Randy process through this is like, I feel like, remember when it used to do the loading sign with on a computer? It's like
the beach ball of death. Yeah. No, I mean that all makes sense.
The video is rendering.
It's a little pixelated over there. When we talk about inspiration, what do we mean by inspiration? Does inspiration mean that God possessed a person's body and moved their hand to make, the different symbols that created language? Or did God stand next to them and tell them what to write? Or was this someone who was moved by their experience with God to write down what they experienced? I mean, there are multiple different ways to think about inspiration. So when we talk about every word is inspired by God, there are lots of different ways we could take that.
And so, yeah, and Melanie, you kind of mentioned a couple of them. So the one is that God literally takes possession of the person, and every single word that they wrote down, including the misspelled words, including every single one of those things is 100% correct and meant. That's what God did. That's one form of inspiration that some people will take on. The extreme opposite end is that maybe that these are, well, I guess the extreme opposite is these are people who just wrote down their life experiences. God had nothing to do with it, and it got compiled into a book, and we now call it holy. That would be one extreme, very extreme side of it. Another less extreme would be that these people were godly people who had experiences with God, and they wrote down their experience with God, and it got put into compiled into a canon. The next one over, closer to to inspiration, is these people were actually inspired by God. These are godly people, but God actually inspires them to write down their experiences and what God wants them to. God doesn't give them the words. God doesn't give them but God's like, just write down this experience, and they do. Another one is that God actually gives them kind of the ideas and says, write this down, and then like I said, the one on the other extreme side is God gives them word for word. Okay, write this down in the beginning, and so that's another extreme. And within the Seventh-day Adventist faith tradition that we are a part of, we've never been on either one of the extremes of what this is. Seventh-day Adventist official belief is that the Bible is inspired by God, that God inspires people, but he doesn't tell them word for word what to write down. They are inspired, but God gives them, hey, tell this story or record this. And they do. And so so it's not problematic when they make mistakes in their grammar, when they misspell words, when things get switched around, when there's two demoniacs in one story and one in another. These are people recording the experience that they had. And as somebody who's worked in news, I can just tell you beyond a shadow of doubt, I have on multiple occasions compared the news story that I wrote to one that my competitor was writing, and I was like, that did not happen that way. And then I went back and reviewed the video, and they're like, they just saw it from a different angle. And yes, they were actually correct, and I was correct. And you're like, well, how can one demoniac versus two demoniacs be correct? Well, it depends on where you're at and what's going on. I mean, you get, you think about it a couple weeks later, and it's like, I think there were two people there. That's what I remember, or and another person, I've seen those kind of things, those kind of details be completely changed in stories. Where in a story I wrote, there was one person. In another story that somebody else wrote, there were two or three. And again, it is what we see and what we record, and that's the beauty of the Bible, is that it's recorded by human beings for human beings, and the Bible was not written to you, but it was written for you to use and to apply.
Cool. Any questions? No? I think everyone was clear but me. So I think that works. Cool. Anyone oh shoot, I didn't look it up. I thought I wrote it down. I was curious, this was totally almost off topic, but rainfall in Bethlehem. I was just curious to see what their annual rainfall was historically.
Historically, it was pretty adequate.
Was it?
Yeah, pretty adequate, because they were very well known for a lot of their grain harvest,
Crops, yeah.
whether it was barley or wheat or whatever the case was. They were very well known for that. However, droughts would come along just as they do today, and the average would get changed a little because there wouldn't be for a period of time.
Collecting and building cisterns for a network of drainage and being able to supply those crops with rainwater was a pretty cool. It's again just something I'd never either read or thought about. But the thing that maybe got me the most for the message was God raised his fist against me. And I'm like, now, is fist the word that was used in the, this is a literal translation of what, his fist? I mean, that just means or seems to drum up ideas of violence or anger at minimum, that for some reason that apparently we don't know, God, or she at least felt that wrath of that she would have said the fist.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it seems like that kind of anger that I feel towards God, or I think God is angry, or I see God as an angry God, there's like something major that's happened that causes me to have that, to bring that together. And I was just thinking to myself, what was it that caused Naomi to feel that much? I mean, she did, obviously there was, you laid out pretty well, actually. I believe
having to leave your home country because of a drought, having your husband die, having both your boys die. Yeah, I would say that would probably put me over the edge.
Yeah. It just, the fist part just seemed really
traumatic.
Maybe. Really? I don't know. Maybe not.
I don't know. I feel like
I'm sure I'd be devastated.
Your spouse dies, both your kids die, you would feel pretty like hurt and devastated. And I think, again, maybe part of the cultural context that we live in helps us out maybe a little bit. Although even in this world and this time, I think we would struggle going through what Naomi went through.
Yeah.
But again, in that time and the place, we live in a society here in the United States that's pretty monotheistic, and if people believe in a God, they generally believe in a God. They generally believe in a God that has grace within Christian circles. There's kind of, God has grace. We also live in a more scientific, rational, where we say, well, if my kids die from pneumonia or COVID or cancer or whatever the case is, well, that there's a scientific reason behind it, and there's this reason, that reason. If Elimelech dies, there's a scientific reason behind it. In the world that Naomi lived in, everything was a result of the gods.
That's true.
The gods had to do, if you got sick, it was because the gods allowed you to, or they were upset with you, or something like that. And particularly where she was at in Moab, there would have been a polytheistic, many gods type of thing. And that's kind of one of the things, again, that I think we lose in translation, is that we're so accustomed to the Judeo-Christian God and that, that God, that we don't live in a polytheistic society for the most part. And even the Israelites were surrounded by countries that were all very polytheistic. And so those societies in particular, whenever something went wrong, it was because you didn't appease the gods, you didn't do the right thing with the gods. And the IVP Bible Background Commentary and then maybe the Adventist Bible Commentary both kind of mention, I think they both do, but one of them for sure does, because in my research I remember seeing this, that in her time and her place, it would have been very common to believe that if your husband and both your boys died, God was upset with you for some reason. You did something that brought this on you, and that God was not happy. The gods would not be happy. And in Naomi's case, if she was a good Israelite, she would have believed in one God, and all the people around her, especially if she's living, in Moab, all of them have polytheistic tendencies. So they're like, okay, you did something to upset your God. And so they had no problem. It's like, okay, well, Randy, you have your God that's in the country that you're in. I have my God. There's multiple gods in my country, but my main God is this one. And so they would kind of rotate between all these different gods. And so when you see her saying that God's raised his fist against her, that would have been a very common and understandable. Everybody in the culture would be like, yeah, you probably did something to make God upset because who has this kind of bad luck? I mean, it's not just luck. It's like something's gone wrong here.
Yeah, it felt a little Job-ish.
Yeah,
maybe to the same scale with everything, but still, I mean,
it's pretty close.
Also, given the fact that she's a woman and isn't going to have the same opportunities he's going to have to recover financially, at least.
Well, even her two sons, they were married for 10 years. And they had no children. Oh. So that's another...
Well, we don't know that they were married for... We know that she was in Moab for 10 years. Did they get married the moment they moved there?
Well, let me look back at this.
Uh-oh. I think Naomi was in Moab for a total of 10 years and then moved back. So the question there, at least in my reading, there's a question mark on when those boys got married, whether that was at the moment they moved in or whether they got married at year 5 or something like that.
I guess it could go either way. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and one named Ruth, and after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband.
So it could have been a different time, but you could also read that as...
But you're right. I mean, if it does seem very unfortunate that both her boys got married, and in that time and place, there's they don't have birth control the way that we do, and in fact, the idea is as soon as you get married, start having kids.
Kids, yeah.
And neither one of her boys produces, children, offspring, which
that only adds to the fist probably.
Yeah.
Well, and then that makes it just feel like you said Ruth and Mara. She changes her name for bitter.
Yeah.
And obviously she feels like she is under the biggest thumb of any god that could have ever walked the planet. Under the thumb, she's got all this she's carrying, but being faithful despite everything. And I thought it was interesting. You said God doesn't defend himself, and God doesn't punish her for doesn't punish for feelings.
Yeah. Like,
I'm feeling this. This is whether I'm ascribing this to you, and he didn't say that there was kind of going back to Job, it's not like me and the devil have this thing that you're going to be faithful to me no matter what happens. So it's not even like there's some kind of a challenge out there.
Well, in the book of Job, God never even explains to Job that was what was going on. He just basically says, "Where were you when I did all these different things?" But in the book of Ruth, there's even less. There's no. God doesn't, the writer of Ruth doesn't record that God has a conversation with Naomi and says, okay, look, here's, where were you when I did, you don't need to understand this. There's none of it. There's neither the writer nor God appear to be that concerned about Naomi's feelings towards God.
Yeah.
And correcting her and being like, oh, hey, look, it's the fact of the matter is your son's just got diseases that are, part of the human condition. It's not that God's mad at you or anything like that. There's no explanation. It doesn't correct anything. God doesn't come in and say, hey, change your name back to Naomi. You're fine. Why are you being bitter? There's none of that. God kind of allows this story to play out.
Maybe the part that kind of leaves you thinking about your own biases, your own ideas about God, and how you deal with them, like you just said, in that same situation. But like Ruth marrying a Moabite would be something that you said, like Moses obviously said, like, look, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing. This isn't. So you could ascribe that as something that maybe God thinks we shouldn't be doing because it came from God. So, but you're thinking about, like, how do you support something that the Bible, God clearly states is wrong, but then are we also to assume that God didn't put them together because God was like, look, fist is coming for whatever reason, whether it was him or just these are just circumstances, or however you believe that to be the case, she's going to need Ruth. So something that could be like, wow, the Bible is like, no, I would not do that. I would not suggest it. I wouldn't live my life that way. But also it becoming this amazing blessing for Naomi to finish her life off in a way that probably without Ruth, I mean, it can't possibly go that well without Ruth, can it? Given what she would have had to have overcome as a widow?
Want to say that with God all things are possible.
Well,
but yes,
okay, yeah.
According to in that time and that place, it would have been rough for Naomi. Well, it should have been rough for Naomi and Ruth. And as we're going to continue on through the story, we're going to see how generous, beyond expectation, and faithful a number of people are in this story. And so, yes, here at the very beginning, we're going to see Ruth's faithfulness to her mother-in-law be very pivotal. It is the pivotal part of this story. But what I really don't want to get lost in this either, Randy, is what I talked about in the sermon, that Naomi was faithful to Ruth as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that kind of gets overlooked sometimes in the story is we're like, oh, look at Ruth. She's amazing. She stuck by Naomi when she didn't have to. And that's absolutely true. And what is also true is that Naomi releasing Orpah and Ruth is incredibly selfless. It is an incredibly selfless thing because she had a legitimate claim on these two women, and she gives them both permission to leave her, which would have left her in a very desperate situation. It was already going to be desperate with the three of them together, but it was going to be incredibly desperate with Naomi being all on her own. And so that's the part I don't want us to lose and listeners to lose out on, is that this whole book is a story of people doing the right thing, not the easy thing, not what everybody else around them in society would have done, but doing the right, doing the faithful thing. Naomi does the faithful thing. Ruth does the faithful thing. We're later going to see Boaz do the faithful thing. And it is a story for us of what it means to do the right thing when we don't have to, when we have the ability to do something to take an easier shortcut. And that's the beauty of this whole book, is it really is a challenge for us to think, what's not the least I can do for those around me? What's the most that I can do for those around me?
I think we turn God into unyielding, immutable, unable to adapt, and yet we see multiple times throughout the biblical record that God seems to have a mind change. Mm-hmm. Initially, you can eat the fruit of the trees and you can eat this, and then after the flood, God says, well, you know what? Now you can eat animals. And then later on, He says, I hate divorce, and then further on that, God says, well, you know what? Sometimes it's necessary. Still hate it, but you need to do it. And then later on beyond that, God says, I should say, I don't know if God says it, but people representing God actually, like Ken said, told the Israelites to divorce their wives and send their children back, which is not anything that that I would ever anticipate hearing God say. Yeah. But so I think that we have to recognize sometimes that God adapts to circumstances. God seems to adapt to time and culture and place and context. And so when we make a decision about what God wants, and then we try to march on and carry that thing on with us all the way through history, maybe that's not how God works. And besides that, I think it's important to think about the reason why God told them, don't marry the Moabite women. And it didn't have anything to do with, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't have anything to do. I don't think it had much to do with racial purity or anything like that. I think the point was God was trying to build this monotheistic people, and the people around them had different kinds of worship practices and worshiped multiple gods, and sometimes did really incredibly detestable things like sacrifice their children to gods. And God was like, I don't want that for you
guys, yeah.
So when you come across someone like Ruth, who, according to the author, was more virtuous than all the Israelite women, the point was not, oh no, don't marry this person of this race. It was, oh, here's someone who is going to come into the household and be part of the household and ultimately worship, the God of Naomi. And the thing that Moses was afraid of happening was not happening in this situation. So I think there's also a level of common sense that we have to bring into looking at these stories.
And when you look at the prohibition on marrying women of the countries around them, this comes back to another story in the Bible that's a really fun one, is Balaam. And Balaam basically he's asked to curse the Israelites. He won't do it, but he gives, do believe it is a Moabite king, the idea. He says, look, hey, just intermarry with them and teach them to worship your gods. And the Bible records that I think that it says that the children of Israel cheated on God by worshiping the gods of their wives as well as Yahweh, the one true God. And so the question is, who's changing who?
Yeah.
And in the case of Ruth Clearly becomes an Israelite woman. She worships the one true God. She takes on the customs of her mother-in-law. She says, your God will be my God. And so she's the one transforming. Whereas what I think God was concerned about when he asked the Israelites not to intermarry in other countries is who's going to be changed. And realistically, a lot of times it's going to be you're not going to be the one changing the other. You're going to be changed into something else. And so anyway, so that's an interesting thing, and it's a principle to think about. And so it's one of the ways when we look at the Bible stories is, what's God really trying to do here? Is God trying to keep racial purity, or is God trying to keep spiritual purity?
Yep. I think I'm trying to think of his name. I thought about it. I think this was the year before Ken got here at church retreat. The speaker was a gentleman, I want to say his name was Brian, but I don't think that's right. And he was from Loma Linda area. And his whole weekend was on God. I believe the name of it was God Changes His Mind. And it was it would be worth going back. I'll see if I can find that somewhere. I don't think we recorded. I think that was my first year at church retreat, and we recorded the podcast, but we didn't have any mechanism at that time like we do now to tape the messages. But to be curious to see if I could find that, because it was one that there was a lot of talking going on afterwards, just for the sake of, and maybe we have a podcast. I'll double check. If it is, I'll put it in the show notes, because it was a very interesting idea that I think growing up Adventist, I never considered it. It was never any option we'd ever heard of at our church or growing up, that God can change his mind. It was always more like, well, this is God's word, this is the law, and that's it. There is no changing the mind. But like you mentioned, multiple things, and as it did he.
I am the Lord, I do not change.
Well, maybe. But maybe.
See, I don't think God does change. I do think I always have viewed it as like raising my kids. And that's a poor example, because I know I have changed a little bit over the years, but the way that my kids understand me is vastly different today than the way that they understood me at ages 2, 3, and 4. And the methods that I use with them today are very different than what they were at 2, 3, and 4. And I think sometimes when we look at God's principles don't change, but he does change the way that he goes about doing things, and because of the time, the place, and the purpose of it. Now I know you get into some interesting conversations when God says to Moses, "Step aside so I can destroy them all," and then God said, and Moses is like, "Hey, don't do that. You're better than that." And God's like, "Okay, I won't do it then." So that's, I guess, another podcast.
I think that was.
Well,
I think that was actually one of them.
And then there's also, God regretted making this people and so sent a flood to destroy them all. I mean, if you think that was the plan from the very beginning, then wow, that's an interesting picture of God.
Yeah. No, I think, and I know that was one of the the scenarios. I think another one was David, but I don't remember the context. I'll see if I can find it. If we did tape the podcast, at least I will put that in today's show notes just so that you could go back and take a listen, because that's going to be it's either 5, maybe 6 years ago. It's a ways back, so I'll see if I can find it amidst the 500 plus episodes that we have, that you could go ahead and find that. All right, so we did have an email this week. If I can find there we go. Hello, podcast team. I recently heard a podcast where Ruth Haley Barton was talking to Joy and David Bailey. In their conversation, the term "the great unfixables of life" was used. Listening to Ken speak about Naomi made me think about how many of us live with unfixables. Naomi returns to her country, but without her husband or sons. So often the Christian story is of the great healing/miracle. To be really direct, how does one still hold faith in God when we have to carry unfixables like cancer, autoimmune diseases, and other terminal diseases? Miracles are beautiful and amazing and don't happen very often. I daily sit with people suffering their unfixables who wonder where their miracle is and why God doesn't seem to care. Thank you for identifying the suffering of Naomi and the pain and sorrow that so many face. Nate. When it's your
Is it okay to say, Nate, I don't know?
Yeah, I was just like, I don't know.
It's such a valid question. And I think if there were easier answers, we would have them there. We'd put them there. And I, Nate, I know you. And one of the things I appreciate about you is that you do sit with people in their suffering. And sometimes, again, I think we act like Job's friends, trying to give him reasons why they're suffering. And, well, you must have done something wrong, or maybe this will be a beautiful testimony to unbelievers about God, God's grace, and when you are able to go through this. And maybe some of those answers are right, maybe they're not. But the point is, I think that when somebody is suffering, maybe those aren't the answers that they're needing to hear at that moment. I think it's always better for people to make meaning on their own rather than us to try to supply the meaning for them. I think for us, it's to sit there with them in their hurt and their pain and their suffering and say, hey, I don't have answers for you, but I love you. I care about you. I will sit here with you. And as you struggle through your answers, I'll be with you. And I hope you'll hold on to God. In spite of what it feels like God's allowing to happen here, and that's kind of a Christian's best case is that God allowed it. The worst case is God caused it. And sitting there in that moment and saying, "Look, we don't have answers." I think that's sometimes so much more helpful than saying, "Oh, well, let me help you find a reason why this happened." I think that can be pretty destructive and pretty painful to hear. Well, you just lost your child so that so somebody else could have this spiritual experience, and again, that hurts. That hurts a lot.
As someone who's experienced some of those unfixables, for me, it kind of comes down to two choices. I can either say, forget God, I don't believe in God, or I don't want anything to do with God. Or I can say, I don't get it, but I'm hanging around to see if at some point it will ultimately make sense.
Yeah.
And so I see it as a kind of suspended disbelief. I don't know, but I'm holding off on judging God for this until I have more information. So it is a liminal space to exist in, the I don't know space. But ultimately, I feel like that is a better place to be in the I don't know with God than to completely abandon it altogether and say, forget it.
And I would see some of those situations where you haven't processed anything because you don't even know what you're supposed to be processing. And the answer is the last thing that you want to hear. I would prefer, personally, I would prefer you just say the can answer, and then what did you call the with God
the suspended disbelief?
The suspended disbelief, and just let me be there, and just let me know that you're there, even if you're not in suspended disbelief, but you're next to me in my suspended disbelief, and you're okay with it, and you make me feel like you're okay with it. That helps.
Yeah. And please don't give me the answer, especially if you have never experienced what I'm experiencing.
That was just going to say, the last thing, like if you haven't been in this exact shoe, then please just don't, because it's worse than if you didn't.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Questions with Lucas. What do we have?
Yeah, so the first one is from Debbie. Even after she asks to be called Mara, the Bible never refers to her as such. It still refers to her as Naomi. So does she really change her name, or is she just venting?
I'm okay if the answer is she's just venting, though.
I think the answer is we don't know, but it does feel like it could be venting. She's also making a very important point to the people, because in the first chapter when she returns, they call her Naomi, and she says, no, call me Mara. I left here it was bad when I left that we had to leave, but I had my 2 boys and I had my husband, but no, just call me Mara, because God has made my life very, very bitter.
Mm.
It could be for just literary continuity as well. Mm-hmm. Someone's name changes in the middle. Even when the angel changes Jacob's name to Israel, it still refers to him as Jacob. I think. So we know what we're talking about. Otherwise, we would have...
how many Israels?
We would have Tolstoy, who has one character that has 16 names, and it's hard to figure out who's talking about who. Sorry, that wasn't meant to be a slam. I have great appreciation for Russian literature. I just sometimes get confused, that's all.
Okay, we have another one from Aaron. Is the story of Ruth also about identity? Is who I am equal I am loved by you? Or is it my identity something else?
Can you read that one more time?
Yeah. Is the story of Ruth also about identity? Is who I am equal to I am loved by you? Or is my identity something else?
Man, it's always tough. Unless it's God, that whose love makes me whole.
Well, it is an interesting question, because we do develop our identity from the feedback that we get from people around us.
Sure.
None of us has an identity that is, absolute and core and uninfluenced by the feedback that we get. So, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. And we have one more. I think this one, Matthew asked in a second service. In that time and place of judges, if God can use any ordinary person like Ruth to shape history, then why Israel was so significant?
Why was Israel so significant? It appears that the writers of a lot of the Old Testament viewed Israel as God's showcase home. It's not that God doesn't love other people or things, but it was kind of God's opportunity to showcase what it would look like to live by following his rules, his laws, and his way of doing things. And we see, I believe, in Deuteronomy where God basically says, when you live this way, all the other nations will come and say, who has a God so great as this, that they live in prosperity and that good things are happening. And so the idea that we actually see come to some sort of high moment is like when the Queen of Sheba shows up with Solomon because of Solomon's great wisdom and reign, and wants to find out, how do you have that? And so there's this kind of almost wink in the story of like, hey, the Babylonians that show up for Hezekiah after he's healed. The idea was always when you read through the undertones of the Old Testament, you see that the idea almost always seems to be that God is not wanting to be exclusive, but God is wanting to use the Israelites as an example of what it means to follow Him and why life is better doing things in His way than in another way.
The Street of Dreams, home, Casa Israel. I like it. All right, next week we have 3 more to go, right?
We do.
Are we going chapter by chapter? And
we are one chapter at a time. 4.
So next week,
chapter
what are we talking about?
We're going to talk about Boaz.
He's in 2?
He is.
Yeah, he gets there. Yeah, he gets there pretty quickly.
He gets introduced very early on, and next week we're going to see what Boaz's name means, and we're going to see how that plays out. And we're going to talk about what it means to be faithful when you're strong.
Strong as in muscular, or strong as in spiritual, strong as in you have the power?
Sure.
Oh, multifaceted. Okay.
Yeah. And this last week we had Naomi show up and tell us her story. Tamsin did a fantastic job.
Is that who it was?
Kudos. The performance
Tamsin Thomas did a great job.
I only listened. I didn't see it because I wasn't here. So when I was getting ready for the podcast, I was like, whose voice? It sounds. The first like sentence, I thought it was. I can't think of her name. I haven't seen her for a while.
Well, I thought she did such a great job that she sounded like Naomi.
Well, exactly. I almost cried.
Yeah, it was.
She did.
Moving.
She was phenomenal.
She did a great job. So kudos to you, Tamsin.
This coming week, I think we're going to hear from a neighbor.
Ooh.
So.
Won't you please, won't you be my neighbor?
Well, you can you can think about that again after you hear from this neighbor. We'll see.
All right. So no sweaters or blue denim shoes. Gotcha. All right. Let's see. Oh. For anyone, this is just a quick PSA. May 7th, which is only about just a little over a week away. The Global Leadership Summit is back right here at Whole Life this year on August 7th and 8th, I believe the dates are. And I already know of 2 people who have signed up and purchased their tickets because after May 7th, they go up by not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40, not 50, but $60. Yeah. That's a big discount.
Mm-hmm.
So it's $189 right now if you get your tickets on or before May 7th. You can go to wholelife.church/GLS, and everything you need to register is right there.
And can I just say, look, Global Leadership Summit is so worth your time. Ask
absolutely.
Anybody who's attended over the last 2 years that we've had it here at Whole Life, and Global Leadership Summit has been going on a lot longer than that. But anybody who's attended a Global Leadership Summit will tell you that every year there's something in there that hits really deep. Mm-hmm. And every year I can think about the 1 or 2 talks. I'm like, wow, that left me thinking about it for kind of the remainder of the year. And all of the talks are phenomenal. And this year's lineup of speakers for Global Leadership Summit is incredible. This is one of the best lineups I think I've seen. And they always have just phenomenal speakers. But you have everybody from the people that it would be, household names that you'd recognize. John Maxwell is kind of a guru of leadership. If you don't know that name, you probably haven't been involved in leadership studies because he's does a lot. He'll be talking again this year to people that you maybe have never heard of before, but after you hear them, you're like, I need to hear more. I already I got a preview of all the speakers when I was up for a retreat with the folks who run this, and I rushed out as soon as I got done and bought one of the books of one of the speakers. It's called Digital Body Language. And I can't pronounce. I'm not sure if I'll get the name. It's like Duan, I think, is the last name. The book is phenomenal. And what she talks about is how in a digital world we lose so much because of body language. We all know that when you communicate, the way that you look, the way that you your facial expressions, there's all these things that give you a lot more information than just the words that are coming out of your mouth. And so in a digital world, we're increasingly communicating through emails and text messages and podcasts where you can't see body language. and she talks about each and every one of these. She goes, how do you insert body language into these conversations in a way that people can actually understand what you're trying to say? And, sometimes we can read things and we think, oh, the person was really mad when they said it, when they weren't. So how can you be thoughtful about your digital? That's the talk I am looking forward to the most. And yet I know that there'll be some other talks that I wasn't expecting that are just going to be incredible. So if you have never been to a Global Leadership Summit, you need to. Last year we had one of our church members here brought their entire office team with them. They invited their office team to come, and talking to them afterwards, they said, this was the best thing that I've done with my team and for forever. So if you've got a group of people, bring them. It is going to be so good. And just super big thanks to Advent Health, who's partners with us on this. They provide a hot meal every day. That's included in the price of this. It's Advent Health is so kind to gift us with that for each person who's here. So that's awesome. And we also have another sponsor this year for the first time, Thrivent, which is a Christian financial group. They're also going to be one of our local sponsors here, and we're excited about them. We're kind of still talking to them about where they're going to be adding value, but one of the things I'm super excited about is they're very intentional about helping out in the community. They really care about that. And so we're looking for a way to kind of couple with them to do something in our community during that 2-day conference. So really cool stuff. If you haven't been a part of it, basically what happens is the Global Leadership Summit takes place up in Chicago at the Willow Creek Church, and then it gets beamed out to hundreds of other sites, not just around the United States, but around the world. And we happen to be one of those sites that it gets beamed to. So you come here, you watch it on a screen. It's very engaging. And it's just an incredible experience. You'll get to hang out with like-minded people who are interested in God, who are interested in leadership. And there are some people who aren't interested in God, and they just come from the leadership aspect of things, and they always leave buzzing about it as well. So even though this has a Christian background to it, you can feel free to bring your friends who may not be Christian, and they will walk away completely enjoying it and having had a good time.
Digital body language, how to build trust and connection no matter the distance. Erica Dewan.
Yep.
The DHAWAN, I think you're right. Sounds right. If not, sorry.
Yep.
But I'll put a link to that book just so you can get an idea about it. And also to GLS, everything is
put a link so everybody can see the speakers. Nick Saban, not my favorite person on earth, but he'll be there. I hear a lot of people. I wasn't excited last year when Mike Krzyzewski came. I really wanted to dislike him. I'm a UNC fan, and
but his talk was pretty good.
Oh, it was good. I hated to say it. It was one of the highlights. It was really, really good. Yeah. And so I'm sure Nick Saban will probably make me have to like him a little bit or whatever. So yeah.
If you have to. But get in on it now, and then actually the link that I'll put in there is actually, I'm sure I can do it, to the flyer. Mm-hmm. Because on the flyer has all of those different pieces, plus it's something you can give to your office group, because it has the link on it to sign up. And it also has some other people that are like, hey, just like Ken said, I brought my business, my whole office last year, and like 90% say this was one of the best things they've ever done together as a group, as business, for leadership. So there's lots of cool things that.
And if you're a part of Advent Health, if you work for Advent Health actually gets a special discount.
Wow.
They even get a deeper. They get a very good discount for all employees. So you can reach out to us and find out more information. You can also maybe reach out to your supervisor. They might be able to find that information. But if you have any problems, just reach out to us and we'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this week. Don't miss GLS. Don't miss week Ruth of 2. Of 4.
You were off this weekend, Randy.
It shows, doesn't it? I wasn't here. I didn't hear the message
2 days
4
off
times.
And
lesson learned. Don't go to the beach.
Yeah, don't go on vacation.
No time off ever again.
No time off. That's it. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great week.